Chapter 1705. Familiar. When Nephi's returned, the courtyard seemed a little livelier than it had been before. A few people had strange expressions on their faces, and a few more seemed to be glancing at Master Sunless from time to time, their gazes full of contempt and amusement. The charming enchanter himself was standing near the parapet of the ramparts, not paying the pointed gazes any attention. He was looking down calmly, a small smile playing on his lips. Nephi's frowned slightly. Has anyone bothered him? She had not anticipated that leaving Master Sunless alone for a few minutes would be a problem. It was only an hour or two after they had shown themselves together in public. After all, no matter what kind of rumors people wanted to spread, such things took time. Nephi's definitely did not want anything remotely unpleasant to happen to the delicate young man, so she had to be more watchful in the future. Approaching Master Sunless, she said in her usual even tone, "I am back. Did something happen?" He turned and looked at her with a smile, then lowered his gaze awkwardly. "Ah, well, nothing too serious. There were a couple young men who wanted to have words with me. I'm afraid I failed to resolve the issue amicably. Oh, well, some people simply don't have manners. I'm rather used to such situations." Neff's frown deepened. Sonny, of course, was talking about himself. It was Sonny who didn't bother with basic manners unless he wanted to, and was therefore used to facing the violent consequences of running his venomous mouth. But Nephi's understood it differently. Cassie. Who were these young men, and how dare they be rude to Master Sunless? Cassie responded a moment later, her voice deceptively smooth. Tristan of Aegis Rose challenged Master Sunless to a duel. Nephi's almost jumped. Of course, her calm expression remained the same, but her mind was suddenly awash with scorching flames. "And you didn't warn me. I explicitly asked you to keep an eye on him in my absence." Imagining the headstrong and domineering scion of the Aegis Rose clan bullying the elegant and gentle Master Sunless made her blood boil, for some reason. Feeling a degree of anger would have been both expected and reasonable, but even Nephi's herself was surprised by the intensity of her reaction. The image was simply too offensive. Perhaps it was because she had just promised herself to protect the charming young man. Now, mere hours later, it had already come to this. Nephi's was on the verge of blushing again, this time out of shame. A sudden thought surfaced in her mind. Should I destroy the Aegis Rose clan? She blinked. No, wait, what am I thinking about? Luckily, at that moment, Cassie responded to her heated question. Neph, relax. What is with you today? Master Sunless is not entirely helpless, and Tristan of Aegis Rose is not entirely brainless. It's just that his flaw is, well, you know how he is. In any case, he is not a malicious person, just a hot-blooded fool. The worst that could have happened was one of them receiving a scrape. Nephi's frowned. Wait, could have happened, not could happen. The duel already took place. Cassie coughed. About that, maybe don't mention anything to Master Sunless. It might be embarrassing for him, even though he technically didn't lose. Nephi studied the charming young man silently. Almost immediately, she noticed a thin vertical tear in his robe, where none had been before. I should offer to heal him. She imagined laying hands on his chest and infusing it with her flames. But how could she offer to heal him without hurting his pride? Cassie said not to mention the duel. Nephi's lingered for a few moments, and then reluctantly decided not to say anything. If Master Sunless wanted to keep what had happened to him a secret, she had to respect his wishes. He was already on the losing side of their relationship, which was to say, employer and employee relationship, so she had to be mindful of his pride. The Aegis Rose clan, however. Nephi's usually stayed away from the internal politics of the sword domain, but if she wanted to exert influence, there was plenty of influence to go exert. Young Master Tristan was about to experience some hardship in his life, not enough to kill him, but plenty enough to teach him a few lessons on how to manage his flaw better. That will also clearly show the other clans that I favor Master Sunless, and that touching the person I favor, pretending to favor, will not go unpunished, which could further the deception, and at the same time protect the charming enchanter going forward, thus killing two birds with one stone. Nephise took a deep breath, still feeling guilty. Then she contained her emotions, nodded lightly and said, "Then please follow me. There won't be any other delays." Master Sunless smiled and gallantly gestured forward. "After you, my lady." As they ascended the steps of the tall tower, Nephise remained silent and thought back to what Cassie had said. What is it with me today, indeed? Many people thought that Nephise was a cold and emotionless person, but they were all wrong. Her emotions, in fact, often burned with a frightening intensity. It was just that she rarely showed them, if at all. Still, looking back, she felt like she had been too flustered in the last few hours, and even before that. Being in the company of the charming enchanter had a strange kind of effect on her. Granted, anyone would have been flustered after what Effie had done. Just thinking about it, no. Nephise refused to think about it. But it was an undeniable fact that she couldn't help but act unlike her usual self around Master Sunless. Usually, she would have been much more guarded around a stranger, but there was just something about the delicate young man that made her lower her guard. It was like an odd sense of familiarity that had no reason to exist, but was deeply compelling, as if he reminded her of something or someone that she had been longing for without even knowing. How strange! The feeling was indeed strange, but not unwelcome. It tasted a little sweet and a little bitter, but mostly it was just there. Nephise sighed. My behavior thus far has been nothing short of embarrassing. Considering that the two of us will be spending a lot of time together, I really need to maintain composure and treat Master Sunless with the degree of respect he deserves. She glanced at him, her gaze once again lingering on his exquisite features and glistening onyx eyes for a moment too long. Suddenly, Nephise felt that maintaining composure would be a bit hard. Following Nephise, Sunny ascended the tall tower and found himself on a spacious balcony that served as a pier for the chain breaker. Neither of them had spoken about the duel, and it suited him just fine. In any case, he had to admit that his actions had been a little naughty. He could have diffused the situation by groveling a little, but chose to antagonize the pompous legacy instead for no good reason. Explaining the sequence of events to Nephise would have been a bit embarrassing, and so Sunny went ahead and shamelessly pushed that responsibility onto Cassie. Some would call such a move unbecoming, but he preferred to call it delegation. The chain breaker was floating in the air a few meters away, with a wide wooden plank affixed between its deck and the stone balcony. Several fire keepers seemed to have just finished loading a bunch of wooden crates into the cargo hold of the graceful vessel, and were now resting beneath the branches of the sacred tree. Noticing Nephise, all of them stood up. Then their gazes fell on Sunny. The fire keepers, especially the two women, had a bit of a strange reaction to his appearance. What's wrong with these people? Considering how devoted the fire keepers were to Nephise, he would have expected a more intense version of the jealous hostility the denizens of the castle had met him with. However, they seemed more stunned than unfriendly. Master Sunless, why are you here?" He forced out a polite smile. "Good day. Oh, I am here to sign a contract. I think we'll be working together often in the future, so please take care of me." The fire keepers slowly turned to Nephise. Then the two women suddenly broke into wide smiles. "Lady Nephise, thank you." "Nice." He stared at them in confusion. Why are they giving her thumbs up? The firekeepers frequented the brilliant emporium due to their friendship with Aiko. Perhaps they really liked his cooking and assumed that he would be employed as a chef. Was the food situation on the Ivory Island that bad? Nephise coughed. Ah, yes. I've invited Master Sunless to the tower. Please get ready to ascend. They joined the firekeepers on the deck. The wooden plank was swiftly removed, the mooring cables untied. And no more than a minute later, the flying ship slowly moved. The leaves of the sacred tree rustled as the chain breaker started to climb into the sky. Sunny looked up and studied it for a while, his gaze lingering on the golden fruits. What would happen if I fed these fruits to Rain? Currently, Rain was preparing to hunt an awakened demon in order to absorb some of its essence and push her own toward awakening. Such was the path most of the ancient people had followed, forging their fates in the crucible of combat. The fruits of the sacred tree contained essence, as well, so its existence was much more precious than the carriers of the spell could ever imagine. Granted, it was a rhetorical question. If Sunny simply wanted Rain to awaken, he would have showered her with soul shards and been done with it. But what he wanted was to make her strong enough to survive on her own, if need be, and so, cutting corners would do her more harm than good. It was the same reason why the legacy clans kept sending their children to face the winter solstice instead of safely bringing them to the dream realm in advance, by gaining access to a sovereign's gate. Sunny often clashed with legacies, but he had to admit that they did a lot of things right. Ah, if only all the young legacies were like Awaken Tell instead of Awaken Tristan. He hesitated for a moment, then looked at Nephise. The two of them were alone at the bow of the chain breaker, gazing at the breathtaking view of the castle, the lake, and the city sprawling along its shore. The atmosphere was quite romantic, but sadly, there was no time to have a proper conversation. The Ivory Island was drifting in the sky above the lake, just shy of casting its shadow on the ancient walls of Bastion. It would only take the flying ship a few minutes to reach it. And indeed, the chain breaker landed softly on the waters of the smaller lake, glistening among the emerald grass of the island, before Sunny could think of anything to say. Please come this way. Nephise led him toward the ivory tower, but she didn't seem to be in a hurry. On the way, they toured most of the island, with her showing him around and explaining how the citadel was organized. It was just as beautiful and tranquil as Sunny had remembered. There had been a few changes in the past 4 years, with the island looking much better cared for and settled. However, the essence of the place remained the same. The emerald grass, the clear lake, the grove of ancient trees, the sun-bleached bones of the mighty dragon, and the great pagoda of pristine white stone towering above it, all like a heavenly palace. Sunny had last visited the Ivory Island almost immediately after killing the winter beast. Back then, he had been skulking in the shadows and in a hurry to leave, unwilling for anyone to notice his presence. It was much nicer to stroll across the verdant grass in the open, and in Neff's company on top of that. A smile found its way onto his face, this one genuine, not forced. Eventually, they found their way into the tower and ascended its steps, reaching Cassie's chambers on one of the higher floors. The blind seer occupied several rooms, one of them serving as her bedroom, one as her office, and one as a parlor to receive guests and hold meetings. The two of them entered the office. The chamber was bathed in sunlight, with tasteful wooden furniture placed sparsely on the stone floor. Cassie herself was sitting behind a desk, her hair a little disheveled. There was a serious expression on her face and solemn focus in her beautiful blue eyes. However, there was a bit of a strange smell in the office. Sunny frowned in confusion. Why does it smell like popcorn? Not that it mattered. Throwing the unnecessary thought out of his mind, Sunny bowed courteously and said in a polite tone, Saint Cassia. Cassie nodded. Master Sunless, please have a seat. Sunny and Nephi sat down in front of her desk, after which the blind seer handed him a stack of papers, with the clause of the contract written on them in neat and pretty cursive. She must have asked one of the fire keepers to serve as her eyes while writing, because otherwise that tidy handwriting would have been skewed and incomprehensible. Cassie smiled. There is a lot to discuss, but please, read and sign the contract first. Sunny gave her a long look. It's your lucky day that I know cursive. Everyone who received a proper education did, but Sunny had only ever known how to type things before coming to the academy. He had learned cursive later, after returning from the Forgotten Shore and getting himself a position as a research assistant. But of course, no one had any way of knowing that. Sighing deeply, he looked over the contract and signed it. Nephi's watched him intently as he did. The moment his signature was put on paper, the corner of her mouth seemed to curl upward slightly. Sunny smiled. Well, as long as she's happy. It's a pleasure doing business with you. And that was how Sunny became the memory purveyor of the fire keepers. Unbeknownst to him, though, something else was happening while he was signing the contract. The news of Sunny's duel with Tristan of Aegis Rose was spreading across Bastion with the speed of a forest fire. Of course, with each retelling, it collected embellishments and turned more and more outrageous. People were talking about it all over the city. Have you heard? Some unknown master defeated Lord Tristan in one strike. They say that they were fighting for Changing Star's affection. There were several Valor Knights and dozens of Awakened in the courtyard, but no one even tried to stop the duel. There were dozens of Valor Knights in the courtyard trying to stop him, but he defeated them all before striking Lord Tristan in the face. There were 100 Valor Knights in the courtyard trying to stop him, but he easily defeated them all, and then beheaded Lord Tristan with one strike. That unknown master is too scary, too tyrannical. What a monster! If Sunny had heard these whispers, he would have paled. He would have also probably said something like, oh no, not again. But he didn't hear anything until the next morning, when Aiko stormed into the kitchen of the Brilliant Emporium and tossed a newspaper on the table. Boss, what the hell is this? Frowning, Sunny picked up the newspaper and read the title on the first page. The title read, A Duel for a Saint's Heart. Wretched mongrel Master S defeats the noblest of knights, Lord T. His hand trembled. The stars shone brightly in the cold black sky. Sitting on a wide tree branch, Rain studied them silently, surrounded by darkness. It's strange. Some of the stars looked familiar, but she couldn't recognize any constellations. The alien sky of the dream realm was different from that of Earth, but worse than that, it was both fickle and unreliable. The stars shining upon the Song domain were different from those illuminating the Sword domain, and even various regions of the two kingdoms did not share the same heaven. Some places did not even have a sun, while others were bathed in the light of many moons. Astronomers were probably going crazy. Why are you still awake? Sleep. You'll need all your strength tomorrow. Her teacher's voice resounded softly from the darkness, making Rain sigh. He was right. She had climbed the enormous tree and tied herself to the branch in order to rest, but now that there was nothing else left to do. I can't sleep. Sleep was escaping her. Her teacher chuckled. Nervous? Rain remained silent for a while. Was she nervous? She couldn't tell. They had spent a lot of time preparing for this hunt. From searching for suitable prey and learning all that could be learned about it to coming up with plans and contingencies, studying the terrain, and preparing all the necessary equipment. The process was only different from all the previous hunts because it had been so extensive. She was supposed to kill an awakened demon this time, after all. So Rain did feel a little nervous, frightened, even. But at the same time, she was a little excited. not only because successfully slaying the demon would finally allow her to grasp the key of awakening, which she had been trying to do for many years, but also because of the challenge itself. She always felt a pleasant rush of adrenaline when facing appalling abominations in battle. To be strong, to be able to protect herself and other people. That was what she wanted, and why she had accepted the ominous shadow's offer to be her teacher. Rain smiled. What is there to be nervous about? It's just an awakened demon. Her teacher laughed in the darkness. Fair enough. There was a bit of silence, and then Rain asked against her better judgment. Teacher, what was the first awakened demon you fought like? The darkness spoke in a tone of nostalgia. Oh, that guy. Ah, as tall as a house, covered in a carapace of impregnable steel armor, with claws strong enough to crush diamonds and a pair of razor-sharp scythes in place of hands. A really charming fellow. Rain raised an eyebrow. Was such a creature really worth feeling nostalgic about? So how did you kill it? Her teacher laughed. Let's see. That was before my awakening, when I was not much stronger than you. So I summoned a corrupted devil and pitted them against each other. At least I think it was a corrupted devil, truth be told. I still have no idea what that thing was, even all these years later. It sure was unforgettably creepy, though. He paused for a moment, and then added with a sigh. And then I acted as bait, while my partner finished the wounded demon off. Rain opened her eyes wide, stunned. She wasn't even sure what shocked her more, the fact that her teacher had apparently been able to summon corrupted devils before awakening, or that he used to have a partner. Who would partner up with that insufferable bastard? Were they crazy? She hesitated for a moment, then asked curiously, "Where's your partner now, teacher?" The darkness remained silent for a while, this time. Then he said in a carefree tone, "Well, I imagine she's in a beautiful heavenly palace, looking down upon us mortals." His tone was carefree, but for the first time, Rain could feel a hint of a strange emotion in it. What did he mean? If her teacher was a dark deity, then could his partner be a celestial deity? No, gods were dead, as were all the lesser divinities. Only nightmare creatures remained. So then was his partner dead? Was that what he meant? Right, it made sense. Her teacher had once admitted to being thousands of years old, so anyone who had fought by his side before his awakening would have been dead for a very, very long time. Rain sighed, suddenly feeling pity for her poor teacher. Wishing to distract him from unpleasant memories, she asked, "But how did you manage to summon a devil to fight that demon?" He chuckled. "By setting the demon on fire. Now enough talking, go to sleep." Setting the demon on fire? How does that even make sense? Full of confusion, Rain let out a long sigh and closed her eyes. The tree branch was swaying slightly under her, which was a bit calming. Just before she slipped into the embrace of sleep, a sudden thought surfaced in her drowsy mind. Wait, if he killed that demon with a partner, then why the hell is he making me hunt this demon alone? Her anxious dreams were cold and restless. In the morning, Rain untied the rope fastening her to the branch and carefully climbed down. Soon enough, she reached the ground, standing on the outskirts of a vast forest of dead trees. Ravenheart was so far away that the mountain chain was merely a dark line on the horizon. There was no ash around, and although the frozen ground was covered in frost, there was no snow either. This was the place where the awakened demon she was intending to kill dwelled. Humanity had conquered a vast area in the dream realm, but that did not mean that the two domains were entirely safe. In fact, safety was a fleeting illusion here. Apart from the citadels and their immediate vicinity, the wilds were still ruled by the nightmare creatures. Humans had only really started to encroach on their reign after the advent of the Dream Gates 4 years ago, building roads and expanding their settlements. In that regard, The current era was very much like the dawn of the legendary Age of Heroes, when mortal champions battled against countless abominations to help the nascent human civilization survive and spread. Of course, modern humans had no gods to guide them. They only had Queen Song, the King of Swords, and the Nightmare spell. Well, in Rain's case, she also had an oddball of a shadow showing her the way. While she was checking her weapons in the dim twilight of the early dawn, her teacher asked calmly, "What makes demons so dangerous? Their strength, their speed, their resilience?" Rain shook her head. "No, it's their intelligence. Beasts and monsters might be stronger, faster, and much more resilient than me, but they are also not too bright. A demon, however, is as intelligent as me. It might even outsmart me if I'm not careful." Her teacher emerged from her shadow and nodded. "So how do you kill a demon?" She counted her arrows while answering. "By being more prepared, by controlling the battlefield, knowing the terrain, and learning about the enemy in advance, by taking initiative and not making any mistakes, by having a clear mind and deadly resolve." He smiled. "No one is perfect. Mistakes happen whether you want to or not, so what are you going to do if you do make a mistake?" Rain stared at him for a moment, then returned the smile defiantly. "Curse you bitterly while I die." Her teacher laughed. "Go on and try dying, see what happens." She stared at him for a bit, then shook her head. "Fine, since teacher insists, I won't die." He nodded with a smile. "Good, now go and kill that demon." Rain had taken off her winter coat, her light armor, and even her military jacket, leaving only the Henley and the wool vest on. No amount of armor was going to protect her from the awakened demon, so she wanted her movements to be as agile and unobstructed as possible. It seemed a little poetic, as if she was proclaiming that there would be no retreat, only victory or death. It was also a bit funny. Awakened warriors were often shown preparing mentally for battle while donning their armor, but she was doing the same while taking it off. Such was the pitiful life of a mundane hunter. The preparations had long been complete, the traps were laid. All Rain had to do was venture into the depths of the forest and face the demon. Taking a deep breath, she went through a series of stretching exercises. She had always been nimble, but after years of training under the sinister shadow, her flexible body was like that of a snake, no, a gymnast. A very graceful, limber gymnast. That was a much better mental image. Still, she had to be careful when going all out. Her mundane flesh was lagging behind her skill and training, so it was easy to damage. "What are you, a ballerina?" Rain glared at her teacher silently. "Didn't you once tell me that you're the best dancer in the world, 2 worlds even? So who's the ballerina?" He coughed. "Well, if your teacher said it, then it's true. There was this one time I danced with a princess at a ball, and immediately after she dragged me into a private room. No, wait. Or was it me who dragged her into a private room? In any case, the two of us ended up in a private room." Her teacher smiled wistfully. "And let me tell you what happened in that room. It was nothing short of life-changing." Rain stared at him for a moment, then pretended to be sick. "Old pervert." He was offended. "Who are you calling old? No, wait, who are you calling a pervert?" She did not deign to answer, shaking her head silently. At the same time, though, Rain noticed that her previous nervousness was almost entirely gone. She felt calm and ready, as if her teacher's familiar nonsense could magically make any situation, no matter how dire, seem mundane and ordinary as well. Rain took a deep breath and checked her weapons one last time. She had already strung her bow. Her quiver was full of arrows. She had made the arrows herself, fashioning the arrowheads from the bones of awakened abominations. Her javelin was ready to be used, while her dagger was freshly sharpened. Finally, there was her sword. She drew the tackeye from the scabbard and studied its blade. At that moment, her teacher suddenly spoke. Wait a moment, for this hunt, I'll lend you something better. He walked closer and then bent down, reaching for the shadow of her sword. In the next moment, something strange happened. Her teacher's hand seemed to reach into the ground and pull the shadow off it. Suddenly, her takai didn't have a shadow anymore, however. There was an identical takai in his hand, only made entirely of lusterless black steel. Rain looked at it, suddenly feeling a cold chill run down her spine. The black takai seemed sharp enough to cut the world in half, like a blade made of pure killing intent. It was as if she was looking at death itself. And that eerie sword was tossed at her carelessly a moment later. Ugh! Rain scrambled to catch it and grasped the black hilt. It was strange despite the overwhelming feeling of cold and dark power the black sword emanated. It felt exactly like her own in the hand. The weight, the balance, even the tactile feeling of the leather ito. She looked at her teacher silently. It was easy to forget because of how easygoing and immature he was, but her teacher was immensely powerful. Actually, she didn't even know how powerful he was, exactly. It was only in moments like this one that Rain was reminded of the fact. Pulling out a sword worthy of being wielded by a saint out of nowhere. No matter how shocking, that was exactly the kind of thing her teacher would do. She carefully sheathed the black takai, making sure that it didn't slice the scabbard apart. This sword seems too powerful to be wielded by a mundane human. You didn't forget that I can't control my essence, did you? Her teacher shrugged. That's all right, it's infused with mine. Rain nodded, then collected the things she was going to leave behind and placed them in a nook between the roots of the old tree, to be retrieved later. Her original sword went atop the neat pile. She stood up, looked into the depth of the forest and started walking. As she did, her teacher spoke. That sword should be able to cut the flesh of an awakened demon even in your hands. Still, don't rely on it too much. Remember, the sword is just a tool. You are the weapon. You are the one who has to kill the enemy, not your sword. Rain nodded calmly. I remember. She cleared her mind of all distractions, focusing solely on the hunt. The demon she was going to kill was called the Huntsman, quite ironically. That was what the people in Ravenheart called him, but actually, the creature's proper name was Chalice Knight. The reason why Rain and her teacher had chosen him was precisely because there was a lot of information to be learned about the Chalice Knights. These abominations were not independent nightmare creatures. After all, rather, they had been mid-rank minions of a fallen titan. The Titan's territory used to be about 100 kilometers away from this forest. Coincidentally, it lay between Ravenheart and one of the other large cities of the Song domain, preventing the construction of a convenient road. A year or so ago, Song Station had battled the Titan and destroyed it, obliterating most of its minions in the process and scattering the rest. Rain remembered that event well because there had been a series of missions issued by the town hall in the aftermath of the battle, all having to do with hunting down the remnant abominations. She wasn't quite strong enough to challenge them, but many awakened cohorts were. So, the surviving minions of the slain Titan had been swiftly eradicated. All except for one Chalice Knight who had found his way into this forest. Despite the fact that the abomination had lost its monstrous steed, thus becoming much weaker, he still managed to decimate several cohorts that ventured into the forest to kill him. Perhaps there was something special about this particular demon, or perhaps the awakened warriors had come unprepared. In any case, they were forced to retreat, and the oddly fearsome Chalice Knight earned a foreboding nickname, the Huntsman. Rain did not consider herself to be stronger than the awakened fighters who had tried to slay the creature in the past. However, she was definitely much more cautious and prepared than they had been. So she was going to hunt the Huntsman. Once she did, her essence would awaken, and she would be able to start forming a soul core. And once her soul core was formed, then, finally, she would be stronger. The huntsman was so dangerous because he ruled the forest like a stealthy predator. He moved unseen and attacked from the mist and darkness, picking off his victims one by one. He also seemed to know the value of intimidation and mental pressure, displaying the mutilated corpses of his victims on the branches of the ancient trees for everyone to see. Or maybe skinning corpses simply spoke to the abomination's aesthetic sensibility. In any case, his human enemies often faced him already shaken and rattled, which was a deadly poison for anyone going into battle. Rain knew that she was approaching the creature's lair because she saw a human skeleton hanging in the trees, its bones clattering against each other in the wind. Her expression darkened. However, she wasn't shaken. She wasn't rattled either. Her mind was much too strong to be poisoned by fear. Instead, fear only sharpened it. "I'll need to bury them properly after everything is over." She shivered not because of the morbid scene, but simply because she was cold. The battle would warm her up, though, so it was all right. Every time an awakened cohort ventured into the forest, the huntsman was in no hurry to attack. Sensing the threat presented by a group of experienced awakened warriors, he stalked them silently or retreated into his lair, waiting for the night to come. Then, when impenetrable darkness shrouded the world, his own hunt would begin. Rain was not a cohort of awakened warriors, so she was pretty sure that the demon would not wait to attack her. It was for the best, she knew, that if she failed to slay the enemy before nightfall, her chances of survival would drop to zero. And yet the huntsman had not shown himself yet. What was he waiting for? She frowned, then glanced at her shadow. "Could it be that the demon is afraid of you, teacher?" A calm voice resounded from the darkness. "It is highly unlikely. I am very hard to notice when I'm hiding in the shadows. There is a much simpler explanation, don't you think?" Rain nodded. Indeed there was. The huntsman was not omniscient after all. He simply had not noticed her yet. Which was what she had been hoping for. Rain knew that she wasn't strong enough to face an awakened demon in a direct confrontation, which meant that she had to rely on traps to even the odds. The problem was that even luring such a creature into a trap was problematic, because he was much faster than her. "Well, if he doesn't want to welcome me." She was going to have to announce her arrival. Soon, the smell of blood and smoke permeated the forest. There was no sound, not even a single branch trembled, and yet there was a presence, a dangerous presence moving through the forest, somehow remaining unseen. Rain could feel it. Her intuition, which she had honed through dozens of hunts, was telling her that a deadly foe was approaching. Sitting on a branch downwind of where the smell of smoke was coming from, her skin smeared in ash to mask her scent, she was watching the forest intently. Even then, she was only using her peripheral vision to observe it. Many nightmare creatures could sense when a gaze was directed at them, so she knew better than to stare. It was for that reason that she managed to notice a small anomaly in the surrounding area. The frost. The patterns of frost on the ground were broken. It was as though someone heavy had walked past, leaving footprints on the frozen soil, and yet avoided her sight completely. "He's like a chameleon." Once she knew what to look for, Rain quickly managed to notice a subtle anomaly. There was a patch of air that seemed to be a little hazy, but still transparent, as if distorted by heat. But how could there be heat in this frigid cold? No, the almost unnoticeable distortion was the masked figure of the huntsman, moving noiselessly in the direction of the smoke. The demon was cautious and prudent, but not as prudent and cautious as she was. That was because Rain was weak, and had no other choice but to remain humble. No wonder so many awakened were defeated by this demon. This chalice night was a bit special indeed. Luckily, Rain had known about that strange ability of his in advance. She had talked to the members of the cohorts who had ventured into the forest to slay the huntsman in the past, and learned quite a bit about this abomination. That was why she had come prepared. She held her breath, feeling the world grow stark and clear. Her battle-ready mind entered the state of clarity. That state. She had been quite angry at her teacher for how vague and confounding his explanations about the meaning of clarity were. But after finally mastering it, Rain finally understood every word. Master the body, master the mind. The essence of combat was murder, and every action she took in combat only served one of two purposes: to kill the enemy or to prevent the enemy from killing her. Something like that could not be explained with words, only learned in battle. However, once Rain truly understood that unfathomably deep, but simple truth, every battle she had fought after that was easier. Time seemed to slow down as her perception expanded. Her thoughts accelerated, and at the same time, the scope of the world grew narrower, eliminating all unnecessary distractions. She could feel every minute detail of her environment with striking sharpness, from the direction of the wind to the slowly dancing snowflakes. Down below, the almost invisible menace slowly approached the bonfire she had made with wet branches, and the butchered corpse of a dormant beast she had laid as bait. It was time to strike. There was no way back anymore. Drawing her bow, she finally allowed her gaze to fall directly on the empty space where the huntsman was supposed to be, and let the arrow fly. Rain had thought that her shot was immaculate and almost impossibly swift. From the moment she knocked the arrow to the moment she let go of the string, less than a heartbeat passed. And yet, frighteningly, that single heartbeat was enough for the demon to react. She couldn't see his movements, but the vague patch of subtly hazy air shifted at an impossible speed. The arrow flashed past. But that was all right. Rain had not been aiming at the invisible abomination, anyway. Instead, she aimed at a burlap sack hanging above the bonfire. The arrow split it open, and fine powder poured into the air. It was not gunpowder, nor was it some expensive alchemical concoction. It was simple flour. However, when the cloud of flour ignited, it still produced a fiery flash. That flash couldn't be called a proper explosion, really, since there was no closed vessel to contain it, but it still served its purpose. That was to cover the huntsman in soot. Suddenly, his invisible form was not that invisible anymore. In fact, whatever camouflage the creature had been using was broken by the rain of burning flour, and Rain finally saw the huntsman in all his vile glory. The Chalice Knight resembled a human wearing a tattered suit of ancient armor that had turned green from rust. He towered at around 2.5 meters of height, but seemed even taller because of the deer antlers attached to his closed helmet. The rusty helmet itself was fashioned to resemble the snout of a snarling beast, with deep darkness nestling in the crack of its visor. There was moss growing here and there on the battered armor, and a ragged cloak, too weathered to retain any color, hanging from his shoulders like a torn banner. The creature was holding a frightening battle-axe in his hand, its blade large and heavy enough to easily split a human in two. The huntsman was like a dead knight that had crawled from under the roots of the forest that had claimed an ancient battlefield, ghastly and imposing enough to make Rain shudder. Worse than that, the dark crack of his visor was already staring directly at her. Her soul seemed to squirm under that gaze. Crap! Rain knocked another arrow on the string and prepared to draw her bow. But before she could, the huntsman had already reached the base of the tree that served as her sniper nest. His dreadful battle-axe rose and fell. That dreadful strike was enough to make the mighty trunk of the ancient tree explode into a hurricane of splinters, obliterating a whole swath of it. But a moment later, a sharp arrow fell from above and lodged itself into his knee. It struck precisely at the narrow gap between the bottom of the abomination's cuisse and the top of his pollen, which were the armor elements responsible for protecting one's thigh and knee, respectively. A pretty decent shot, considering the situation. But Rain did not have any time to celebrate. because the tree was already toppling, and she was falling with it. After a moment of weightlessness, the rope tied around her chest drew taut, and she found herself flying through the air. If there was one thing her teacher had told her, it was that one should always leave themselves a path of retreat. Rain had never considered that climbing a tree would protect her from an awakened demon, so she naturally prepared a way to escape. In this case, that way was swinging on a rope and flying between the trunks of terribly tall trees at breakneck speed. She had not carried a sizable length of silk rope all the way here in vain, at least. As the wind whistled in her ears, Rain thought, "This is going to hurt." Struggling to control her body, she spun at the last moment and used her legs to dissipate the shock of colliding with another tree at great speed. The other end of the rope was tied around one of its highest branches, which allowed her to swing like a pendulum. Well, a badly designed pendulum, maybe. She did not break her neck or crack her skull, which was a relief, but her feet were in agony. Ignoring it, Rain immediately cut the rope with her dagger and plummeted down, landing softly on the frozen ground. There, leaning against the trunk of the tree, two things were waiting for her: her javelin and another arrow. Sheathing the dagger in one smooth motion, Rain grabbed the arrow and spun around, already drawing the bow. The huntsman was barreling toward her, so fast that it was hard to track his movements. But still, he wasn't faster than her arrow. With her mind clear, she could sense the movements of her enemy. So she did not aim at where the abomination was, but at where it would be. Another arrow pierced the air, striking at his other knee. Sadly, this time, Rain's aim was a few millimeters off. The precious arrowhead struck the edge of the huntsman's cuirass and shattered, only managing to slice some moss off the rusty green metal. The huntsman was an awakened demon, while the arrowheads of Rain's arrows were made from the bones of awakened abominations. Theoretically, the demon's armor and the arrowheads were of the same rank, but she herself was not. Strangely enough, that made her arrows weaker than the rusty green metal. It had something to do with essence, laws governing the world, and will. Rain wasn't entirely clear on the details, but what it meant in practice was that she had to strike at the cracks of the abomination's armor, which she had failed to do this time. She did not waste time lamenting the mistake. Grabbing the javelin, Rain spun and ran away. She ran as fast as she could. What bravery, what courage! There was no such thing on the battlefield, only strength and weakness, life and death. In normal circumstances, outrunning an awakened demon would have been impossible, but there was currently an arrowhead lodged in one of his knees. It didn't matter that such a small wound was not at all dangerous for a creature of his rank and class. A joint was a joint, and if there was something disrupting the joint's function, even a demon would be slowed down. Rain had specifically fashioned the arrowheads in a way that would make removing them nearly impossible, unless the victim wanted to take a sizable chunk of flesh out with them. So even if the shaft of the arrow was broken, the damage still remained. Granted, it would have been much better if both of the huntsman's knees were hurt. Because now, she really did not know if she would be able to escape his axe long enough to accomplish her goal. Run, run! Gritting her teeth, Rain did the unthinkable. She tossed away her bow. That was a terrible loss, not because she was afraid to lose it, but because the quiver of arrows she had hidden up ahead would be useless without it. But she had to sacrifice something, and her javelin seemed much more useful in a battle against such a large foe. As for her sword, well, her teacher had given it to her. She would never discard it. She felt incredibly lucky about leaving her coat and armor on the outskirts of the forest. Run, goddamn you! Rain did not have eyes on the back of her head, but she could feel the ground trembling and hear the branches snapping behind her. In fact, the huntsman was barreling directly through the trees, snapping the mighty trunks like matches. It was as though an unstoppable, inescapable behemoth was pursuing her, getting closer and closer. He was already no more than a dozen meters away. A dozen meters, 10 meters, 6 meters. Rain's heart was beating wildly in her chest. But then finally, the trees receded, and she escaped into a vast open space. That was where she had wanted to fight the demon. Be more prepared. Control the battlefield, know the terrain, learn about the enemy. Take the initiative and don't make any mistakes. Have a clear mind and deadly resolve. That was the recipe for winning a battle against a demon, any battle, really. So this was the battlefield that Rain had chosen. The open space in front of her was a swamp that hid in the depths of the forest. Currently it was frozen over, the treacherous depths encased in a layer of ice. The ice was covered by a thin carpet of snow. Rain was light enough to walk on the ice without falling under its surface. The huntsman, though, with his frightening size, heavy armor, and dreadful battle axe, he was going to have a bit of a problem. Feeling death approaching her from behind, Rain did not waste a single moment and stepped onto the hidden ice. Rain was ready to step on the ice when something inside her screamed. Perhaps it was because of the subtle change in the sounds behind her, or perhaps it was because of the change in the currents of the wind. Perhaps she had subconsciously noticed the shadow moving unnaturally around her. In any case, she didn't hesitate even for a split second before throwing her body down. An experienced warrior did not allow themselves to be ruled by instinct, but they also never ignored it. A warrior's instinct was the result of countless hours of training and rich battle experience. After all, blood, sweat, and tears went into hunting it into a life-saving tool. Rain dodged, and in the next moment her side was pierced by a flash of blinding pain. She spun in the air and crashed into the ice, throwing herself into a roll. A moment later, Rain was already on her feet, sliding back as she held the javelin between herself and the enemy. A muffled groan escaped from her lips. The huntsman was spinning his grotesque battle axe, a few drops of blood marring its heavy green blade. Damn it! Rain briefly glanced down to assess the damage. It wasn't anything serious. The axe barely grazed her, leaving a long cut across her ribs. But if she had been even a little bit slower, it would have split her open like a log. More stitching. It was a little absurd, but she was more upset about having to mend her bodysuit than about receiving a wound. Her body was much more resilient than the threadbare bodysuit, after all. You bastard! As soon as the words left her mouth, the demon took a step forward. Suddenly they were surrounded by silence. The huntsman entered the vast clearing, his armored boots sinking into the snow. Simultaneously, Rain backed away from his towering figure. They were like a fearsome predator and its powerless prey, the predator preparing for a lethal lunge, the prey raising its quills in a vain hope to save itself. The heavy javelin usually gave Rain confidence, but in front of the dreadful master of the frozen forest, it seemed a fragile willow branch. Come on, come closer. She needed to lure him into the depths of the swamp. But to Rain's outrage, the abomination halted after barely stepping on the ice. The darkness nestling in his helmet moved mockingly, and he raised the axe, pointing it at her. Curse you! The demon was just as smart as she was. So, he seemed to have easily recognized the threat that a thin layer of ice hiding the treacherous swamp posed to him. Rain had expected as much. She smiled darkly and continued backing away, increasing the distance between them with each passing moment. Demons were intelligent, but they were also absolutely crazy, like all nightmare creatures were. She could allow herself to walk away from the battle if she wanted to. But could the huntsman allow a human soul to escape from his clutches? She didn't think so. And indeed, out there on the shore of the frozen swamp, the demon's fingers twitched. He stared at her silently, making Rain's skin crawl, and then let out a frenzied growl. Coming from inside the huntsman's helmet, which was shaped to resemble the snarling snout of a beast, His growl sounded more than a little bit menacing. Rain's mouth was suddenly dry. "Really? Wow, come get me then." The demon struck the ground with his axe, sending a tremor through it, and then took another step. An echoing, melodious sound resounded from below them as the cover of ice started to crack. She prepared herself. In the next moment, the huntsman lunged forward with stunning speed. The wind howled as his massive body tore through it, the terrible axe rising to deliver a fatal strike. It all happened very fast. As the demon was advancing, his foot fell through the ice, and in the next moment he plummeted down. Black water and pieces of ice flew into the air as if there was an explosion, and Rain felt the swamp tremble. Cold drops pelted her face. Of course, water alone was not going to slow the huntsman down. A human would have been rendered helpless by the need to struggle against its weight, but an awakened demon was powerful enough to shrug such a burden off without any effort. At that distance from the shore, the water was only to the huntsman's waist, so he continued moving forward after a momentary delay. But still, it wasn't a lake or a river. There was no ground under his feet, only the treacherous mass of the ancient swamp. Although the abominations managed to prevent himself from sinking, for now, its speed still dropped. More than that, the moment he fell through the ice, Rain was already moving. And before the huntsman could regain his bearing, the heavy tip of her javelin had already crashed into his helmet. She did not get greedy with that attack. Greed was the third most common cause of death among experienced fighters, following directly behind arrogance and bad luck. After delivering a strong blow to the demon's face, Rain immediately pulled back and jumped away. And just in time, a split second later, his axe whistled past the spot where she had stood before, colliding with the ice and splitting it. The attack was much too fast for her to perceive and react in time. If Rain had not anticipated the danger and disengaged in advance, she would have died. Her side burned with cold pain, but that pain only made her mind sharper. Her heart was beating steadily, pumping blood throughout her body. Her muscles seemed to have come alive, making her body light and alert, brimming with energy. It was a state of absolute focus and awareness, so heightened that it couldn't last for too long. Let's see which one of us is the real demon. Brandishing her javelin, Rain grinned and escaped the cracking ice, already searching for a way to deliver another blow to the frenzied abomination. Less than a minute later, a vast swath of the frozen swamp had turned into a ravaged scene of devastation. The pure white snow was washed away. The ice was broken and shattered, its shards floating in the black water like dirty glass. The water itself was restless, boiling and rippling from the furious movements of the huntsman and the escaping gas. The swamp was trying to swallow the frenzied abomination, but was getting battered by him instead. The demon would sink deeper from time to time, but then tear himself from the insidious embrace of the marsh. Even though that struggle allowed Rain to survive so far, it was not enough to grant her victory. She was breathing laboriously. Rain had continued to retreat deeper into the swamp, and the demon continued to pursue her like a demented executioner. She had delivered more than a dozen strikes to him, but none dealt any serious damage. Even when her javelin pierced the cracks of the huntsman's armor, it felt as if she was trying to cut wet fur. Rain did do some damage to the hidden flesh of the demon, but not nearly enough to matter. At the same time, her own body was not faring well. She had not been cut by the dreadful battle axe again, so there was little blood, relatively speaking. However, there were bruises. In fact, after being tossed around by the furious power of the demon's blows, Rain felt like her entire body was one giant bruise by now. And that was even considering that she fought as cautiously and cowardly as she could. The huntsman had much longer limbs, and his battle axe had much more reach than the black sword her teacher had given her. So, even if Rain was willing to risk clashing with the abomination face to face despite being slower and weaker than him, he would have held a great advantage. Stories like to speak about exalted skill and unbreakable resolve, but in a real fight, the outcome was often decided by the most mundane of things. Reach trumped skill, and weight definitely trumped will. Well, perhaps it was different for the awakened, whose power refused to obey common sense. But for someone like Rain, having a longer weapon meant emerging victorious more often than not. Which was why she did not draw her sword yet, relying instead on the heavy javelin. It's all right. Her javelin was crafted from the same material as her arrows, and it was not as if a mundane human could not leave a scratch on the body of an awakened abomination. In fact, it was entirely possible to slay one, just a bit hard. Things would have been different if Rain was facing a fallen nightmare creature, but then again, she would have never allowed herself to end up in such a situation. Her teacher tasked her with slaying an awakened demon precisely because it was not impossible for her to succeed. It was just that. The huntsman had proven to be much tougher than she had anticipated. Rain had expected to be powerless against his armor, but even when she managed to bypass it, the result was minimal. It was as though there was another layer of protection hiding behind the suit of rusted green armor. Something had to change. The demon was just as domineering and frightening as before, his movements just as foreboding. Rain, on the other hand, was starting to feel tired. Not only did she have to attack and dodge the terrible axe, but she also had to be careful about the ice. If she fell under it, then she would die from her own trap. And with more and more of the ice ending up shattered, staying away from the black swamp was becoming more and more difficult. Her lungs felt like they were on fire, and not only because she was pushing her resilient body too far, the air reeked, as well, full of foul gases released when the ice encasing the swamp was broken. Something had to change soon. Luckily, a change was coming up. Not too far behind her, and drawing closer with each frenetic sequence of offense and retreat, was a twisted tree. The tree itself did not mean anything, but the fact that it stood in the middle of a swamp meant that there was enough soil there to support its roots. There was a tiny island underneath the tree, which could save Rain or doom her. To hell with it. Rain was about to take another step back, but then paused and stood her ground instead. Her body tensed like a powerful spring and surged with strength. From her feet to her thighs, through her core to her shoulder, and finally into her arm, a powerful force was transferred and multiplied, and as Rain's torso turned, her arm flew forward like a whip. She let go of the javelin. The heavy weapon flashed through frigid air, dove under the huntsman's axe, and plunged deeply into the crack on his rusty breastplate. The power of her throw was dire enough to give the demon a momentary pause. Using that short moment, Rain turned around and dashed toward the distant tree. She knew that the abomination would follow, but it was slowed down by the swamp, sinking deeper the deeper they ventured into it. By now, the dirty water was already above the huntsman's waist, and his speed had dropped significantly. Rain ran to the tiny island, pursued by the sound of breaking ice and surging water. There was just barely enough time. Reaching the tree, she ignored the quiver of arrows hidden beneath its branches. Without a bow, they were all but useless now. Instead, she grabbed something else, a bottle of hard liquor her teacher had procured somewhere the day she turned 20. Currently, there was a length of cloth dangling from the mouth of the bottle. His voice suddenly resounded from the shadows. Wait, what are you doing, ungrateful brat? That's my most expensive bottle, you know." Rain ignored the startled voice and produced a brass lighter. She wasn't fond of drinking anyway. No, really. What had he been thinking, gifting a young girl alcohol? What kind of attitude was that for a teacher? Had her teacher been a delinquent in his youth? Igniting the cloth, Rain stood up and swiftly turned around. The huntsman was barreling toward her like a frenzied icebreaker. He had long torn her javelin from his chest and snapped it in two, leaving the broken pieces far behind. For a moment, her heart ached for her trusty weapon. Then Rain gritted her teeth and tossed the bottle at the demon. "Catch this, you rusty piece of—" The huntsman did not even bother to move his axe, swiping the bottle away with his gauntlet. Of course, it shattered instantly, spilling burning alcohol all over his towering figure. The flammable cocktail was not going to damage an awakened demon. But that stench in the air. There was a lot of gas trapped beneath the ice, and currently all of it had been released, surrounding the abomination like an invisible cloud. And when the bottle shattered, the cloud instantly turned into a sea of raging flame. Of course, Rain did not see any of it, because she was already diving behind the twisted tree. Swamps had a natural inclination to produce methane, which often remained trapped beneath the surface, forming voluminous bubbles of putrid gas. And those were only the swamps of the waking world, which were much safer than the marshes of the dream realm. Well, at least they had been before the dark times. In times of war, humanity had unleashed all kinds of weaponized horrors upon itself. So, today, there was no telling what kind of buried plagues could be released into the world if someone went around digging in the swamps of Europe or the northern quadrant. The dream realm might have actually been safer in that regard. None of it mattered to Rain, though. What mattered for her was that methane was highly flammable. And so, when the huntsman shattered the liquor bottle, it ignited. Crap! Diving behind the tree, Rain pressed her body into the ground and covered her ears. In the next moment, she was momentarily blinded by a violent flash. Then she was assaulted by unbearable heat. And then the entire world shuddered. Rain was tossed into the air, as the tree she had been hiding behind was obliterated. That was not supposed to happen. Marsh gas could ignite and burn but not explode, and especially not so fiercely, at least not under an open sky. Perhaps the flames somehow reached a huge pocket of trapped methane, or perhaps it had something to do with the pockets of gas sticking to the surface of the ice. Perhaps the entire swamp was anomalous, and the gas she had set aflame itself was unnatural. In any case, the result of tossing the liquor bottle surpassed Rain's expectations. By a lot. Crashing into the ground, she felt the wind being knocked out of her and let out a suffocated groan. Rolling in a mess of limbs, Rain fell into shallow water and came to a halt. That hurt. She was hurt and dazed. But there was no time for such frivolous things as pain and disorientation. Opening her eyes, Rain pushed air into her lungs, choked on smoke, and slowly stood up. The swamp around her had transformed. It had been a plain of pure white snow once. Then, it turned into a chaotic mess of broken ice and surging black water. Now it was a burning inferno. Ghostly flames danced on the surface of the glistening black water, and the air was full of smoke. The snow had melted, and the shards of ice were swiftly disappearing in the scorching heat. Everywhere Rain looked, darkness was intertwined with a fiery glow, and shadows undulated as they danced among the flames. Rain was assaulted both by chilling cold and terrible heat. Her shirt was soaked in icy swamp water and sweat at the same time, which was a terrible combination. The ash she had smeared on herself to mask her scent had been washed away. The cut on her side was pulsing with pain. That wound would have to be disinfected a lot. She let out a long sigh. At the same time, her sword hissed as it left the scabbard. Gripping the black hilt with both hands, Rain took a step forward and left the shallow water behind, returning to the soil of the small island. There was no fire where she had stood, and close to no flames where the twisted tree, now a smoldering stump, had been. However, a fiery wall rose at the opposite edge of the island. As Rain assumed a stance, the wall of flame parted, and a lumbering figure emerged from the fire, stepping onto the island in the clangor of metal. The huntsman looked a little haggard. The moss covering his armor had turned to ash, and one of the deer antlers crowning his helmet was broken. There were cinders glowing in the cracks of his breastplate, and Rain's nose was assaulted by the stench of burned fur. The abomination had lost his tattered cloak, but the dreadful battle-axe was still held firmly in his iron fist, even if its long shaft seemed charred. Almost twice as tall as Rain was, the ancient demon towered above her like a grim reaper. The darkness nestled in the crack of his bestial visor was full of frenzied fury. But she couldn't help but notice that the huntsman was hunching slightly, as if suffering from grievous wounds. Her lips twisted into a dark smile against her will. "What a pity. There's nowhere for me to retreat until the flames die. Would you mind waiting patiently for a minute or two?" Instead of answering, the huntsman raised his harrowing axe. Rain's dark eyes glistened. "Didn't think so. Well then, I'll just have to kill you bastard right here." A split second later, she was already moving. Of course, the huntsman was moving as well. And a lot faster than her, despite weighing at least 5 times as much. But Rain knew how he was going to act and where he was going to move. It was not because she had a prophetic gift or could read the abomination's mind. It was simply because she understood his physical limits from doing her research and observing him in battle, as well as because of her knowledge of combat. She knew how to wield a polearm and how one proficient in the use of a great axe would most likely attack. She knew all the elements that comprised such a suit of full-plate armor, how they were fastened to one's body and to each other, and what limitations to one's movements they would cause. She knew that the demon would favor his right leg, because his right knee was not damaged, and that he would protect the left side of his chest more, since the breastplate there was cracked, and the flesh beneath had already been pierced by her javelin. Most of all, she knew that the huntsman was boiling with demented wrath. That mad frenzy clouded his judgment and made his actions more predictable. So she had a few advantages of her own. As the flames danced and the small island quaked from the heavy burden of the demon's footsteps, she dashed forward and met him with a flash of her black sword. The harrowing battle-axe would have split her in two if she had not sidestepped at the last moment. Rain had managed to evade the attack, albeit just barely. Still, the length of the axe and the huntsman's arm length were too great for her to strike at the towering abomination. But she had not aimed at the demon's mighty body. Instead, she aimed at the axe. Just as the fearsome weapon flashed past her, the black sword fell in pursuit and severed the charred shaft cleanly. It had avoided the metal bands reinforcing it and bit into the burned wood, slicing through it as if it was butter. The axe blade sunk into the muddy soil, and the huntsman's balance was suddenly disrupted without its weight. Now holding only a severed shaft in his hands, the demon staggered and fell heavily to one knee. The ground quaked. In that moment, Rain could finally reach his body with her sword. The enemy was in front of her, kneeling and momentarily vulnerable. Who knew how long that vulnerability would last? The demon would most likely regain his bearing a heartbeat later. Everything inside Rain screamed for her to attack, to throw her body forward and slay the abomination before that happened. After all, she could not be sure that there would be another chance later. Adrenaline flooded her bloodstream and her heart thundered feverishly. Her pupils widened, her mind drowning in excitement, fear, and frenetic urgency. But at the same time, the memory of the teacher's arrogant voice rang in her ears. "Bruise? What do you mean it will leave a bruise? Listen, disciple, you should be grateful to your kind and gentle teacher for educating you so tenderly. The last time I made such a mistake, I was stepped on by a mountain. Now that left a bruise." It was the mark of a skilled warrior to keep a cool head in the middle of the fiercest of battles. And so, she suppressed her excitement, ignored her fear, and cast away her sense of urgency. Don't be greedy. Greed will get you killed. It is a sin, and only those strong enough to bear the consequences have the right to be sinful. Rain did not abandon her caution and attacked calmly. The tip of her black sword slid into the seam of the huntsman's breastplate, plunging deep into his side. This time, there was very little resistance. Unlike her javelin, the dark takai pierced the demon's flesh almost effortlessly. But instead of leaning into the thrust or twisting the blade to wreak more damage, Rain immediately pulled it back and jumped away. And just in time. Although the huntsman seemed momentarily dazed, and his weapon had been destroyed, his fist was already tearing the air with stunning speed. If Rain had been a split second too slow to disengage, her head would have been turned into bloody pulp. As it was, she had enough time to block with the dark takai and receive the harrowing blow on its blade. She was thrown backward like a rag doll. Which was the intended outcome? If Rain had been stubborn and tried to stand her ground, her body would have received the bulk of the impact. But by allowing her to be carried away, she dissipated the force greatly. It still hurt like hell. It felt like every bone in her body was about to burst. But they didn't. Rain was tossed back into the shallow water once again and skidded in the mud. The icy water washed away her sweat and numbed the pulsing pain in her side, which felt almost pleasant. I need to stand up. This time, it took her a little longer to gather herself. Feeling the mud starting to pull her down, Rain groaned and rolled onto her stomach, then staggered to her feet. The black takai rose into a high stance, sending drops of dirty water flying. How badly did I wound him? It had to be a pretty terrible wound. The black sword created by her teacher was even sharper, deadlier, and much more frightening than she had imagined. If the huntsman had been a human, he would have been dead by now, his heart pierced by the dark blade. But he wasn't. He was a chalice knight, a demon from the retinue of an ancient titan that had haunted these lands for thousands of years. So, even though the wound Rain had delivered him was ghastly, it was definitely not enough to bring the abomination down. She had done something equally important, though. She had destroyed his axe, effectively disarming the horrid demon. Looking up, Rain stared at the huntsman. The abomination was still kneeling, his hands resting in the mud. Fetid blood was spilling from the seams of his scorched armor. The bestial snout of his snarling helmet seemed even more terrifying now, and there was dark liquid flowing from between the green fangs. Come on! Disarming the huntsman was not that important, in and of itself. Sure, without the great battle axe, his reach would shrink, allowing her to engage the abomination in melee. But he was more than strong and ferocious enough to tear her apart with his bare hands. Rain could hold out for a few seconds and survive a handful of exchanges, but attempting to fight the demon up close would inevitably result in her death. However, Chalice Knights were not simple abominations. These towering, armored warriors of the bygone era harbored a ghastly secret. Rain had not learned that secret from talking to the awakened who had ventured into the forest and faced its fearsome overlord. Instead, it was something that everyone in Ravenheart knew, that she had known from the day Sation, Queen Song's daughter, killed the terrifying leader of the Chalice Knights. The tales of that battle had spread far and wide in the Song domain. More than that, detailed information about the surviving abominations was provided by the town hall when it issued the extermination missions. The bestial helmet of the huntsman was no mere decoration. It hinted at his true nature, because all Chalice Knights were shapeshifters. There was a rabid beast living in each of them, and when the ancient warriors faced a powerful enemy or were in danger, that beast came out. The dreadful demon that she had been fighting so desperately did not even show the true extent of his harrowing power yet. But now that his axe was destroyed, and his blood was pouring into the mud, he would. And that was Rain's best chance to kill him. Out of there in front of her, the kneeling huntsman let out a husky growl. His limbs flinched, as if struck by a painful convulsion. Then his growl grew into a deafening roar. The demon's armor cracked. No, it was his bones cracking underneath it. His spine bent, and dark fur suddenly burst from the seams of the rusted armor. Long claws tore through the metal of his gauntlets. The transformation had started. It seemed gruesome and gruesomely painful. It was also deeply frightening, not only because Rain knew that the unleashed beast would easily rip her to shreds and devour her, but simply because watching something human-like suddenly change into something inhuman was terrifyingly appalling. None of that mattered to her, though. What mattered to Rain was that, from what she knew, the transformation of the Chalice Knights took some time to happen. Even if it was just a couple of seconds, in a battle, those seconds were like an eternity. She had been waiting to stake her life on that eternity the whole time. As the huntsman's bestial roar reverberated across the burning swamp, Rain dashed forward. Her steps were light and swift. Before the demon could assume his true form, before the echo of the roar was swallowed by the shadows, she reached the kneeling abomination and brandished her black sword. The dark blade hissed coldly as it cut apart the world, and also the huntsman's neck. The darkness nestling in the crack of his visor gazed at her silently as his growl abruptly stopped, and the bestial helmet flew into the air, a fountain of dark blood spilling from it in a spiral as it spun. It was a clean cut. The horizontal slash was performed with perfect form, thanks to the thousands of practice swings she had performed under the watchful guidance of her tutors. The huntsman's severed head fell into the water and sank into the swamp with a ripple. His towering body swayed slowly and then collapsed. Rain swayed as well and sprawled in the mud next to it. The tension drained from her body, but so did all her strength. She breathed hoarsely, staring at the distant sky. The flames were dying down, but she was still surrounded by terrible heat. Well, it's good. I won't freeze to death yet at least. In the smoky silence that followed, a sudden noise resounded, sounding indescribably misplaced in this hellish scene. It was the sound of applause. Rain tiredly turned her head and stared at her teacher, who had finally deemed it necessary to crawl out of her shadow. His voice was unnecessarily loud. "Congratulations, you have slain an awakened demon, Chalice Knight." He smiled and added quieter, his tone turning warm. "Well done, well done." Rain had just killed an awakened demon, but hearing her teacher's praise was strangely just as validating. Or rather, it made the act of slaying the huntsman feel more meaningful. In any case, it was a nice feeling. Too exhausted to move and hurt all over, she simply lay in the mud and rested. Her gaze was directed at the sky, which was as empty as her mind. Feeling too lazy to think, Rain simply stayed still and savored the moment, unbothered by the encroaching cold. By then, the ghostly flames had been mostly extinguished, with only a few small tongues of fire dancing here and there above the ravaged swamp. While she was spacing out, her teacher disappeared somewhere. Soon, he emerged from the shadows, carrying her bow, backpack, and other things she had left on the outskirts of the forest. Placing most of it on the ground, her teacher then walked over and carefully covered her with her winter coat. "Here, don't catch a cold." Rain smiled faintly, enjoying the warmth. Her teacher, meanwhile, approached the corpse of the huntsman, looked at it curiously, and gave it a little kick. Then he circled it slowly, mumbling some nonsense in a hushed tone. Chalice Knights, wait, don't tell me. Were these the poor bastards who drank Jade Queen's nectar? Soon there was nothing but bestial need left. They might be. What fools! Even my little sister knows not to drink everything given to her by shady characters. It's you're the shady character. Rain wanted to scoff, but then decided against it. Instead, she asked, "Teacher, can I awaken now?" She knew the answer, of course, but hearing it again would give her confidence. He smiled. Well, you've already made great progress and learned how to sense your essence. I'm pretty sure that absorbing the soul shards of this demon will be the final straw and serve as a catalyst to make your essence awaken. Of course, that alone won't make you an awakened. Her teacher looked at the mud with a finicky expression, then reached into the shadows and pulled out an opulent wooden chair out of them. Placing it on the ground, he sat down and let out a satisfied sigh. The problem is that there will be no vessel to store your essence, and no bridge between your soul and your body, at least that is how I understand it. However, you will be able to control your essence, and by controlling it, you will be able to create such a vessel which is itself the bridge, a soul core. It will require time and effort, but with your level of enlightenment, I am sure that you will manage splendidly. When you do form a soul core, that is when you'll undergo a rebirth and become awakened. Rain listened to his voice silently, then sighed. How long will it take? Her teacher chuckled. I have no idea. That wholly depends on you, but from what I am told, learning to control essence is the hard part. Forming a soul core is relatively easy, albeit tedious. So, a few months, a year, we'll have to wait and see. I bet I can do it in a day. Rain didn't voice her defiant thoughts and smiled. What comes next? Sitting comfortably on his luxurious chair, her teacher smiled. Ascension is a step of rising above one's mortal nature. You will have to accumulate power by improving the quality of both your soul essence and your body. That can be achieved naturally by slowly refining the essence or by slaying powerful enemies. Once your essence reaches a qualitative change, the last step is to reform your soul core. That's a bit tricky. He shook his head. The easier part of the process is learning how to access your soul sea. The harder part, sadly, it requires the knowledge of a soul-refining technique. In the past, many such techniques were known to us humans, but sadly, that legacy has been lost. These days, everyone simply relies on the nightmare spell. Rain raised an eyebrow. So what? I can't ascend. Should I just go and jump into a nightmare? Her teacher furrowed his brow. Can't ascend? Who do you think your teacher is? Of course, you can ascend. The fact that no one else has a soul-refining technique doesn't mean that I don't, or that I can't invent a new one from scratch. Rain turned her head and stared at him dubiously. So does he have one, or is he going to invent one? Well, it didn't really matter to her now. She was not even an awakened yet, so ascension seemed distant enough to not feel real. Even the awakening. Rain sighed. I still want to challenge a nightmare. She had decided that she wouldn't, but that didn't prevent her from fantasizing about becoming a carrier of the nightmare spell. Her teacher stared at her somberly. What, why? She pursed her lips. I just want to, okay? Fine, it's great that I can form a soul core and awaken, but will I really be an awakened? What kind of awakened doesn't have an aspect? Not to mention that I won't be able to receive any memories from the spell. All those awakened in Ravenheart are walking around in suits of shiny armor and wielding enchanted weapons. Clothes that clean and repair themselves. Quivers that never run empty. Best of all, they can just summon and dismiss their equipment instead of having to lug it around while climbing mountains. The path of ascension was too laborious without the spell. Rain was willing to accept that finding her aspect and flaw would take her a long time, perhaps even longer than becoming a master. But the memories, simply not having to launder her clothes, would be worth it. Her teacher suddenly laughed. So this is what it's about, memories. Rain glared at him for a few moments, then gestured weakly to herself. A weird apparition like you might not care, but look at me. Soot, ash, sweat, swamp water, mud, blood, and gods know what else. This is what I have to deal with after each hunt. There are no washing machines in Ravenheart either. I'll need to wash it all by hand or pay a laundress. That's after I pay the healer to patch me up. And speaking of patching things up, these clothes need to be mended too. Her teacher shook his head, laughing. Oh, I see. So it's not devastating enchantments and mystical powers that you envy, you just don't want to do laundry. She opened her mouth, speechless. That's not true. He smiled crookedly. It's not. Rain gritted her teeth. I also don't want to carry all that weight on my back. Her teacher leaned back and laughed again. Unbelievable. After having his fill of laughter, her teacher shook his head and stood up. Looking around, he picked up a piece of charred wood and scribbled something on it with his nail. His nail cut the wood like a diamond blade. A few moments later, he nodded in satisfaction and tossed the piece of wood to Rain. Here, catch. She raised a hand and caught the piece of wood, then hissed quietly when her side pulsed with pain. Ouch! Bringing the strange gift to her face, Rain studied the letters carved on its surface. They read, "You have received a memory." She frowned. What's this? Her teacher shrugged with a smile. Treat it as a memory coupon. What did you think, that only the spell could reward people with memories? Well, wrong. Your teacher is awesome, so he can make memories just fine. Let's see. You killed an awakened demon this time, so I'll make you an awakened memory of the 3rd tier. Rain blinked. You can make memories. He returned to his chair and grinned. Sure, and unlike the spell, I'll even customize it to your liking. More than that, listen, I really don't want to badmouth the competition, but the spell, it really has no imagination whatsoever. Why limit memories to powerful weapons, enchanted armor, and mystical tools? There are so many mundane things that would make for an amazing memory. That bodysuit of yours. I'll memorize it, no problem. Do you want a pillow that is always cold or a magical toothbrush? Your teacher can make that happen as well. He looked at her with a smug expression. Hell, I can even make a roll of toilet paper into a memory. If you don't go overboard, it will never run out. Why the hell is that bastard talking about toilet paper? Rain stared at her teacher for a while, then blinked a couple of times. Are you telling me that you have been able to create memories this whole time? He nodded. Strange question, but yes, sure. Slowly, Rain's blood started to boil. So why the hell haven't you made me any memories then? Was watching me suffer fun for you? He glanced at her with an offended expression. Huh, what are you talking about? I was always planning to arm and equip you. It's just that you are still a mundane human. Until you form a soul core and awaken, your soul can't even contain memories. Blame yourself for being so slow. What's so hard about becoming the first human in history to awaken naturally, huh? Do I ask for much? She took a deep breath and turned away, staring at the sky again. What an insufferable cheapskate deity, who can make memories. Slowly, a few grandiose thoughts entered her mind. After a while, though, Rain sighed. Well, it's good enough. Teacher is amazing. Sure, I won't have an aspect, but having memories is already great. Receiving them directly from someone instead of earning them from the spell is a little weird, I guess. It's not much different from how legacies inherit memories from their clans, though. Her teacher frowned, then chuckled suddenly. Hey, now that I think about it, aren't you a legacy yourself? Your big brother can provide everything a legacy clan can, and much more on top of that. She looked at him scornfully. Oh, teacher is like a legacy clan now. So do you have a legacy relic then? He tilted his head with a smile. A bunch of them, actually. Rain blinked a few times. Does he really? Actually, she wouldn't be surprised. Well, what about a citadel then? He grinned. A citadel? Sure, I have one of those. It's a huge temple built of black marble, shrouded in eternal darkness. Granted, it's a bit of a fixer-upper, but what can you do? My citadel is almost as old as the universe. The ambience there is great." She stared at him silently. "That's great. Speaking of great, since it's teacher, there has to be a supreme in our clan, no doubt. Should I consider myself royalty? Might as well, right?" Her teacher coughed in embarrassment. "Ah, well, technically, our clan doesn't have a sovereign at the moment." Rain's eyes gleamed with triumph. His capacity for nonsense has a limit, after all. "But we do have a supreme devil. I used to bully the little bastard a lot in the past, but now that he's all grown up, it's not very fun." She took a deep breath, turned away and stared at the sky. The sky was indifferent and beyond reach. "I give up." After a while, Rain felt rested enough to move. She rose from the ground with a grimace and went about taking care of her wounds. Her teacher had made a fire from the splintered remains of the twisted tree, so neither of them had to freeze in the cold. Rain disinfected the cut on her side, then wrapped it tightly in a clean bandage. That would have to do until she returned to Ravenheart and found a healer. Usually, she would have been lamenting the need to pay one, but there was a sizable reward promised to anyone who managed to slay the huntsman. Not only could Rain afford a decent awakened healer, but there would be enough coins left for her to replace the broken javelin, and maybe even upgrade a few pieces of her equipment. "No, wait, actually, I don't need to worry about that anymore." Rain still had hope of awakening swiftly. Even if she failed to do it before returning to Ravenheart, there would be no more hunts in the next few months. She already had everything she needed to form a soul core, so the best course of action would be to hole up in a safe place and patiently work on becoming an awakened. Once she was an awakened, her mundane equipment would not be of much use. She would be able to draw a much more powerful bow, wear armor crafted from much heavier mystical materials, and even wield memories. Her entire arsenal would need to be changed. She would have to purchase a lot of things. Suddenly, Rain did not feel rich anymore. She was so poor. Full of sorrow, Rain put on her winter coat and approached the remains of the huntsman. She stared at it for a while, then glanced at her teacher. "Should we harvest his armor? It should sell for a lot of coins." He scratched the back of his head. "Who's going to carry it all the way back to Ravenheart, though?" Rain sighed. "How can a deity be so useless?" "Yeah, still, we should take the axe blade at least, to prove the kill at the town hall. That axe blade alone would sell for a hefty amount of coins." She fished the giant blade from the ground and attached it to her backpack. Her teacher, meanwhile, looked at the remains of the dreadful Chalice Knight and snapped his fingers. Several shadows suddenly rose from the ground and sliced the carcass apart, cutting the rusted armor like paper. Rain didn't look at the bestial features of the corpse as she harvested the soul shards and sat down, staring at them solemnly. There were 3 of them. The glimmering crystals were not too large, but to her, they meant the world. This is it, then. She had been striving desperately to reach this moment for 4 long years. Those years had been full of pain and hardship, but also joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment. And now, the final stretch of the road was right in front of her. Her teacher sat on the ground across from her and smiled with encouragement. "Go on, you worked hard to be here." Rain looked at him, remained silent for a moment, and smiled back. "I did." With that, she unsheathed her knife and crushed the soul shards one after another with its pommel. She felt a stream of power flowing into her soul. And then her soul suddenly surged. Rain struggled to describe the way she felt with words. It was as though her entire body was suddenly permeated by a cool, vibrant, nurturing flame. However, that flame simply passed through her flesh, unable to touch it. What is happening?" Her teacher was looking at her with keen interest. The gaze of his onyx eyes was strangely intense. "I can see it. Your essence is awakening. It is as though your soul, which had been dim and drowsy, is suddenly coming to life. A soft radiance is spreading and it is lively." He remained silent for a moment, and then spoke in a calming tone. Try to control it. Guide it throughout your body, following the roadmap of your major blood vessels. Your blood is circulating because of your heart, but you don't have a soul core, which is like a heart for soul essence. So for now, you'll have to substitute it with your will. Rain took a deep breath and closed her eyes, imagining the map of her body. She could feel her essence flowing freely, chaotically, with no shape or form. So she slowly extended her will and tried to guide it. She had never been able to control her essence before. It had always felt like trying to push a boulder to the top of a mountain. The boulder was dead weight. It was cold and reluctant to move. The moment she lost concentration, even a little, it rolled back to where it had come from. But this time, her essence felt alive and responsive. It followed her guidance, flowing slowly in a complicated cycle. At first, there was a lot of chaos and colliding currents in its flow, but as Rain deepened her concentration, the torrent of her soul essence grew increasingly stable and orderly. Her teacher chuckled in amazement. "Wow, on the first try, you're doing great." Rain did not open her eyes. "So how do I form the core?" His voice was calm and confident, like an anchor that she could use to keep steady. "The method is simple. Once you can make the essence circulate freely, increase the speed. Make it rush like a mountain river. Then, increase the speed even more until it's spinning inside your body like a raging whirlpool. Make it condense under the pressure of its own weight and the pull of the rotation. You don't need to form the entire soul core all at once. One grain of sand is enough. Next time you will create one more, and then one more. Sooner or later, the density of your essence will reach a critical point, and a soul core will be formed." Rain smiled. She could imagine it vividly. It was a beautiful process, like stars and planets forming from incandescent stardust. She concentrated fully, making the essence circulate faster and faster and faster. The greater its speed, the more willpower she needed to keep the raging force of the whirlpool under control. "Come on, a little more." She could feel a condensed mass of energy slowly forming in the place where her heart would have been. It was not solid yet, but also not as ethereal as the usual state of soul essence, more like a shimmering liquid. And at the very heart of that mass, where the pressure was most crushing, something solid was slowly being born. A tiny crystalline gemstone, so small that it could only be called a grain of sand. "Ah!" Rain opened her eyes and shuddered, her entire body drenched in sweat. The whirlpool of essence dissipated, and she sprawled on the ground in utter exhaustion. Her chest rose and fell heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. The mental fatigue was even worse. Her teacher raised a fist. "Success, you did great." But Rain was full of bitter disappointment. "A single grain of sand, did I really boast that I'll form the soul core in one try? Ah, so embarrassing. Thank the gods I didn't say it out loud." How long would it take her to create enough of these tiny gemstones for them to merge into a core? A month? A year? Rain wanted to groan. But doing that would undoubtedly make her teacher way too happy. She couldn't let the enemy win. She sighed and then slowly sat up. "I'll stay home for an entire month, let Mom pamper me, and work on awakening slowly." Disappointed? Who was disappointed? A whole month or even several months of doing nothing and being spoiled rotten. No biting cold, no blood and sweat, no hideous abominations and revolting corpses. Just eating well and meditating in peace. It was a dream come true. Wouldn't it be great to rest for a few months while being absolutely safe, with nothing terrible happening? It sure would. Her teacher suddenly looked at her with suspicion. His onyx eyes narrowed. "What is this? I sense a familiar disturbance. Hey, you didn't just think something stupid in your head like, finally, the worst of it is over, or that demon is definitely dead, nothing bad will happen, did you?" Rain raised an eyebrow, and put on an innocent expression. No, why would I? Only a complete fool would think something like that in the middle of the dream realm. He studied her dubiously for a moment, then exhaled slowly. Well, good, and don't use such harsh words. Some people, very smart people, were known to make small mistakes like that in the past. Anyway, time to head back to Ravenheart then. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.